Good morning. Welcome back. You're still watching The Break on this 5th day of September 2023. And it's something that I want us to have a conversation about the ongoing Africa Climate Summit that kicked off yesterday. Many pronouncements made, different leaders agreeing that it's time that we stop the blame game, but take action. And of course, lots of questions about climate financing. And of course, the question of carbon credits coming up very prominently in that conversation. And in studio, I have Justus Obuyabo, the acting CEO at the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam.
Then I have Olawunmi Olabusari. Did I say that right?
You did. Thank you, Sam.
Great. She's the policy officer at One Campaign. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam.
Then we have Mendy Jonjo from KCB Foundation. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Great. And we have Professor Stephen Kiyama from the University of Nairobi. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam.
And it's good to see all of you. I want us first to start by appreciating what your institutions are doing specifically on climate change. Should I begin with the bank, maybe? Tell us about what you're doing there.
Certainly. Thanks for that question, Sam. So within the bank, it's helpful to think of the work that we're doing in maybe 3 concentric circles. The first is the work that the bank itself actually does. So for instance, we have pledged to be net zero by 2050. We also try and make sure that within the bank we reduce our carbon footprint by 10% over the previous year. And then there's also the work we do now as a bank. So with our banking practices, our banking policies. So some of the things that we do within this space are actually the ones that have the most impact. So we try and do things like green financing, and by green financing, it's trying to make sure that we're lending to people who are actively trying to shift how they are doing climate positive projects or climate positive work. We also try and make sure that we do no harm. So we have what we call an exclusion list. So people who are particularly bad when it comes to either environmental or social policies, we'll try not to lend to them. And third is in the public space, so the public sphere, which is where now the foundation work also comes in, where if you look at somebody who is looking at things like the MSMEs, these are the vehicles through which we're going to actively create a lot of either climate positive or climate negative work. So it's really trying to shift how we finance, how we work with them, so that they're adopting like really climate positive technology. So that, in a nutshell, is some of the work we do as a bank.
What is net zero?
So net zero means by 2050, we want to make sure that we are not emitting any carbon, because normally what happens is that during your activities, so, you know, the fleet that you run, you're emitting carbon, or through your activities, you're heating your offices, you're emitting carbon and other greenhouse emissions into the atmosphere. So what you have to do is to try and make sure that you put in place sustainable policies, sustainable practices that actively negate this emissions of carbon into the air. So what we're trying to do is that by 2050, everything that we do should, by the net effect, have absolutely no carbon emissions or greenhouse emissions into the atmosphere.
I want to understand that. So you work in a bank, you lend, you collect back, you keep deposits. How do you emit the greenhouse gases?
So actually, we all emit greenhouse gases. One of the things that this climate conference is trying to do is to also shine a spotlight in terms of when it comes to responsibility for emitting these greenhouse gases, how do we actually try and make sure that the emitters are also trying to work towards also reducing these greenhouse gases. So as a bank, or as actually anybody who's sitting across this room, when I woke up in the morning, I drove here. So the car that I was using, if it is an internal combustion engine that uses diesel, that uses petrol, that emits carbon into the air. If you turn on your computer at work, there's a certain electricity that is being generated. That electricity, there is a certain amount of carbon that was used to produce it. The computer itself that you're using, the plastics, everything that went into the generation of that created a certain sort of carbon emission into the air. So in almost everything that we do, because of the way industry is structured, and that's, I think, part of the conversation that we're trying to have at this climate conference. We emit carbon every day. And what we should be trying to do is to make sure that through our activities, we are, number one, investing in technology that in the production, in the consumption, and also in the disposal of the things that we do, we are actually not creating these emitting technologies.
So by 2050, you want your staff to probably have electric vehicles, for instance. What will happen to the laptops?
So what happens is that if you look at also the supply chain, right? So the people who supply people like the bank, they are also responsible for making sure that through their technology innovations, through the work that they do, that they also invest in technologies that at the end of the day are not emitting carbon into the air. So there is quite a few things that have gone into this in terms of what energy are you using. So a lot of them are trying to shift to green, because even when you think of things like IT, it's a very energy-intensive activity. So it's looking at the energy that you're using. It's looking at how you're also consuming and producing this plastic. So it's a whole host of activities that go into what they say decarbonizing actually the economies, right? Okay. And this is part of this broader pledge that that was made at Paris. In terms of companies, supply chains, we should all be working towards trying to make sure that we are decarbonizing our economies.
Okay, interesting. We'll get more details in a short while. But Prof, at the university, it's such a big institution. I mean, you have such an impact on the minds of many young Kenyans, and even impacting on what they do the rest of their lives. What are you specifically doing that would be in tune with all these global efforts?
Yes, you got it right. You know, we are in the business of generating knowledge, and we are in the business of sharing knowledge and to our students and beyond, because our students also interact with their families. Right. And also we publish and share this information. We are in the business of mentorship to instill the good values, including values to do with the environment. And we have also set the 3 institutes that to deal with the issues of climate change and the environment in general. That is the Wangari Maathai Institute for Peace and Environmental Studies. We had a very high-level meeting there yesterday, where we had even Ban Ki-moon was with us, and Graça Machel yesterday, to brainstorm on some of the things that can be done and climate change in creating jobs for the young people. We have also the Center for Environmental Law and Policy, because there are policy interventions that are needed, and there are scholars working on this. And we have also the Institute for Climate Change and Adaptation, where, for example, there is research taking place on nature-based solutions to adopt or confront issues of climate change. You know, it takes me back to the days, for those who read the Bible, the days of the Noah's Ark. Remember, because every time we say the climate change, the problem we have is man. Is man is anthropogenic. It's man who has brought about this problem. And even then, when you read the Noah's Ark, God vowed that the man is evil and the resource, and they want now to get rid of everybody. And then Noah was advised on what to do, and using also those laws of rotation, the things that are known already. Put up, it is explained, he put up a huge ark, and certain animals and himself and his family were saved. And when you look at the magnitude of what is described in that level, it means that even today, when we have been faced with this huge threat, right, we have to put in a lot of resources to solve this problem. And we must have knowledge. Because if people do not have knowledge, then they don't think that there's real, that this is coming. In
Right.
fact, they say there are those who do not find it useful to enter, isn't it? So we must all work together, just like that time, which is described, and put money, including in research, to ensure that the world is saved, and all of the planet is saved, and we are all there, and ensuring that the generation behind us find a planet they can thrive on. So the universities are working on this. All the universities, you find they have programs in biological sciences where there are various things they need to do there. You know, there's issues of also climate smart agriculture, where there's a lot of research which has been taking place to see what are the crops that can survive these changes. Issues of energy conservation. So there are a lot of various approaches that the education institutions are taking to ensure that we can confront this issue of climate change together. But we need everyone. We need the private sector, we need government, we need the society to move to the next level.
Have we gotten to a point where, I remember when I was at the university, and one of the common courses was about communication, and I think it was quantitative skills. Have you gotten to a point where climate change becomes a unit that is offered to every student, or it's not necessary at this point?
No, it isn't. We haven't done it. And one of my programs at the University of Nairobi, at least, when I talked about the issue of the people reforms, is to ensure that now we bring about the issue of environmental ethics as one of the courses to be taught to every student, environmental ethics, so that it is taught climate change and all other aspects, how our actions contribute to worsening the climate. Are taught to everyone who goes through the University of Nairobi. This is one of the courses we are developing, actually. Okay. And we will be able to...
Do you know, like, the timeline, the next how many years?
My target was that when we get this new cohort of students, we should be able to start that program. Yes, yes. No, I took a few days leave. This is some of the things I'm picking up now.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
We'll talk more about that. Now, the next person who I wanted to ask a question is going through a moment. So let me go to the acting CEO at the Nuclear Power and Energy Company. Talk to us about, because there's all this conversation about renewable versus non-renewable, what is sustainable, what is safe. How well are we doing as a country in the nuclear energy production, but also the research going into that? And where does it fall? Is it climate smart, or what is it? Because I don't think it's renewable necessarily.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam, for your question. First of all, maybe I need to clarify, the organization is called Nuclear Power and Energy Agency. It's a state corporation within the Ministry of Energy. And the role of the institution is actually to guide the country towards the process of introducing nuclear technology as one of the means of generating electricity in the country. And it's actually a long-term program which involves a number of activities. You have to do a lot of preparation work. You have to do a lot of creating the environment, the legal framework, having the appropriate personnel that will actually be able to run that program. So that is the function of the agency. But going on to your question, when you're talking about climate change, I think there are two critical things that we always have to bear in mind. The first one is adaptation, and the other one is mitigation. Now, adaptation will appear to be the easy one, but it's also a very dangerous journey to take, because it is saying that this is what has happened, and therefore you adapt to what is happening. But as Prof was talking about, we are human beings, and we have to see what is happening and think of solutions to the problem. Then we move on to mitigation. We try to find ways in which we can address the problem that is sitting with us. And therefore, you need to start thinking of how are you going to address the problem that we have. You will note that majority of the greenhouse gases that we're talking about are actually caused by the quest of man looking for energy. We're talking about energy to move our cars, energy for cooking, energy for transport, energy for industry, and therefore 70% of that is contributed by energy, and that is why you see energy coming in big in this issue.
Right.
And you will note that for a long time, most of our energy needs have actually been sourced from fossil fuels, which are the worst polluters. And as a country, one of the things we are doing is to try to move away from that and look for cleaner, renewable sources. And you know that Kenya is big on wind and solar and so forth. In fact, today, the Ministry of Energy is actually launching the green hydrogen strategy, which is also going to assist us in that effort. But you asked the question of how nuclear comes in. Now, nuclear is very important to address the question, because when you're talking of heavy lifting, you need baseload and you need affordable and reliable energy. And nuclear has actually been determined to have a very small footprint, and therefore that addresses the question of reducing carbon emissions. And during operation, a nuclear power plant actually produces zero carbon, and therefore that is also working towards mitigating the effects of greenhouse. So there is that technology out there. It is being used in many developed countries, and it's also an option that is being considered by Africa. In Africa, we have several countries that are already considering this. As you may know, South Africa already has nuclear technology and generating electricity. Egypt is at a very advanced stage of and about to launch the first nuclear power plant. We have Ghana, Nigeria, Rwanda, Uganda, and our neighbor Tanzania also working very hard towards that goal. As a country, we are also considering that, and Kenya is also in that race quite ahead in Africa, in that, according to the International Atomic Energy Program of implementing a nuclear power program, there are 3 critical stages that a country has to go through. The first one is to make the decision to go nuclear. Then the second one is the preparatory stage, where you go into these activities that you're talking about. And then the final stage actually is when you commission the nuclear power plant. And in all these stages, they're called milestones. There are certain issues that a country needs to address. And once you have done that, then we have the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the UN specialized agency addressing nuclear issues, comes in and reviews and checks whether you've actually done the activities that you need in a particular phase to give you a green light to move to the next. So Kenya has safely completed the first phase, and we are now squarely in the second phase, where we are doing the preparatory activities so that we will be now able to now go ahead to start procuring for the nuclear power plant so that we can have that. But there's something which I cannot avoid to mention at this stage, that the technology in nuclear is so advancing that we may now be able to move away from the traditional nuclear power plant. And I can equate that to the traditional landline that we had, where we're talking about a nuclear power plant being a big thing being built in one location, and it operates that. Today we have another technology in the name of small modular reactors, which are
small what?
Small modular reactors. These are small nuclear power plants that are portable, and the technology around them is so advanced, they are more safe, and they use AI technology. So with this kind of development, we need to actually, as a country, also be willing to embrace that and bring them on board, and therefore address the issue of climate change through that technology.
So when you say they are portable,
yes.
What does that mean?
Thank you very much. Portable is in the sense that a traditional nuclear power plant is like this building, put in one place, and the infrastructure that goes into it is that it will always be here. But the small modular reactors are smaller and can actually be carried on a truck, on a ship, and move to another location and address issues. And that can actually be useful in a country like ours, where we have remote areas. We could have a small nuclear reactor being taken to a place like Samburu and installed there and address the concerns of electricity in that region.
Okay.
Yes.
And how far away, because I would imagine, even as you look at the portability of the reactors, you also need to have where that will be situated, the location itself. How far away in that, but also do we have the raw materials, or it's something that you'll have to procure from outside?
Thank you very much. First, I address the question of location of the reactor. Because of the uniqueness of a nuclear plant, there are certain siting requirements that have to be addressed. So we will go through a siting process where we do detailed site characterization. We consider a number of things. But as I've mentioned, the small modular reactor is not a big thing, and therefore the siting requirements for that are less stringent compared to the one for a nuclear power plant, which will require more stringent requirements. And coming to the question of how that will be deployed, because of the international rules regulating nuclear activities, there are certain rules that will guide the deployment process. For instance, we may have a nuclear power, the small nuclear modular reactor, which comes already with fuel, prefabricated fuel in it, and therefore we do not have to manufacture the nuclear fuel here. It will come already with it, and it will be used in it. I could give an example of maybe a laptop which comes with already its battery. So the only thing that you have to do is recharge.
Right.
You know.
Okay. Yeah. Good point. We'll get more from you. Now, I have to say your name correctly, so I don't get it wrong. So, Olabusari.
Olawumi, Olabusari. Yeah, you can call me Ola.
Ola. but Ola is a petrol station around here.
Oh, really?
But all the same. So you come from one campaign, which is a global institution that is trying to talk about these matters, not trying, but actually doing it, and advocating for action. What has been your experience, and what challenges do you find when you look at different countries in Africa on how they're approaching this climate change? Because there's still that argument that, and the president of Kenya was talking about it yesterday, that there's been blame game for too long, that the global north is the global west is the one that is responsible for the emissions. The countries in Africa, not as much, but they suffer the biggest consequences. What has been your experience on how the African countries are taking action and the decisions like what you hear on the table?
Sure. Thanks again for having me. So one is a global campaign, an advocacy campaign. So what we are in the business of is policy change and advocating for it, and using our resources, which includes our young people in different parts of the world, to push for that change, using our messaging and our research to drive public mobilization around issues. And using pop culture to really relate to people and meet them where they're at. So, you know, often it's hard to break down some of these complex global issues for everyday people, and we want to make sure that we're bringing people along on the journey with us. So what have I seen working in this space? I think for one, climate became a must to engage in, because climate and development are very dependent on each other. We cannot fail on one and win on the other. We have to work on both, right? If we fail on climate, we fail on development. If we fail on development, we fail on climate. And I think that has been the reason why we've gone into the space, because we've understood that climate change is a threat to the progress that this continent has made in areas of health, in areas of education, in areas of food security. And I think even in African countries, we see our leaders understanding that threat. We may not always have called it climate change, or we may not always use the big science, of the IPCC reports, but we intimately feel the effects of the change on our planet. And nobody feels those effects more than the pastoralists and the people in our agriculture sector who are dealing with the effects of a changing climate on their livelihood, on their ability to feed themselves, on their ability to have access to resources such as land and water. And I think because the people at the grassroots are feeling this, our governments have no choice but to be responding to climate change. They might not all have adaptation strategies, but a lot of them do. But they are all in the business of responding to those issues. And African governments, I mean, some countries are spending 2 to 4% of their GDP adapting to climate change. When extreme weather events like Cyclone Freddy happen in Mozambique and Zimbabwe, governments have no choice but to respond to the damage that those events create. And the truth is, climate change is driving faster or rather more frequent and intense extreme weather events such as cyclones, such as flooding. We're seeing greater desertification. And our governments are responding to that. They have been good at sort of meeting the milestones or the different actions that the UNFCCC, the body that's kind of that's in charge of coordinating a global climate response. So we have nationally determined contributions, which are the commitments that governments have made to changing the different production consumption systems we have to make them more climate resilient and to reduce emissions, right? We have national adaptation strategies. What we don't have an abundance of is money. And so for one, especially with our history of holding highly industrialized, richer countries accountable to their development commitments, we want to also hold them accountable to what they bring to the table. So you spoke about the fact that there has been this divide between global north and south. And I agree with His Excellency President Ruto that we have to move beyond that, but I think we cannot forget how we got here. And the truth of how we got here is that a few nations industrialize off of using fossil fuels and account for most of the emissions that have existed throughout history, right? What that means, though, going forward, is that we need to consider equity when we respond to the climate crisis, because it affects us all, yes, but it does not affect us all equally, and the resources to respond to it, to address it, are not distributed equally as well. And what Africa has, as is being emphasized in the summit, is we have lots of resources that, if harnessed properly, could really provide the whole world, not just ourselves, with climate solutions. We have renewable energy, we have critical minerals that will be used in solar panels, in wind turbines, all of that. So that's what we're bringing to the table, okay? We're bringing something to the table. Let's not get it twisted. We're not just asking for money. But what we do need from our counterparts is that we need the financing to realize this, not just for Africa, although it will help drive green growth in our countries, but really for the whole world. And if we fail to invest in Africa, then we're failing to invest in ourselves as a global society.
Interesting. And that has been the opening of the conversation you're having this morning about the efforts being taken by different stakeholders, the challenges that are being experienced, but also what to do for the generation, should I say the currents of the future, because they have to take on this responsibility. We take a short break here. We come back and hear more from the panelists here in studio. You're still watching Citizen Planet.